Today we have a really special treat for y'all. Three of your classmates, Jack Ventresca, Emily Ann, and Finn Jakite, are going to be participating in a student panel interview of Jessica Bruder. These three students have all engaged in depth with her work over the course of the last few months, crafted questions on their own for this session, and I hope that it will be very enlightening. So now I'd like to turn it over to Jack, Emma, Finn, and Jessica Bruder.
I'm not sure about this 3 against 1 thing.
Hi, my name is Emma. I'm a junior.
I'm Jack. I'm a senior.
I'm Finn. Oh, wow. I'm Finn. I'm also a senior.
Okay, so we come up with our first question is, what do you think is the difference between studying journalism and working as a journalist?
Sure. I had an interesting experience studying journalism in that I went to school part-time and actually started working as a journalism while I did it. For me, that was really, really exciting, and I try to encourage my journalism students to do the same thing. So it really depends on what kind of work you're doing. If you're studying at undergrad, it might be more classroom-based, but I encourage anybody who's studying it to just start doing it. Because the truth is, you don't need a special magic card to be a journalist. You don't need a lanyard with something around your neck. What you need to do is to be curious and talk to people and write. So even when my students are brand new, I like to help them start pitching. So, I mean, you know, in your copious spare time, you could be working as a journalist right now if you had stuff you wanted to pitch. We can talk about that later if you want.
So another question we have, it's more about Nomad Land, is how did you really gain access to the communities and individuals that you wrote about in the book?
Yeah, really slowly. I mean, before I had anybody interested in it, it's not like I can just teleport and talk to people in person. I like to do things in person. It's harder to tell people to go away in person. You may notice I'm still here. But in the beginning, gosh, I think I approached maybe 40 people from Camper Force on email. And you know what? Or Facebook. They were all in a Facebook group together, and I couldn't join the group, but I could write to them. So I came up with my pitch, you know, what I'm interested in, things that I thought would hopefully make me not very scary, that they would want to engage with me. I tried to think about their perspective, reached out to them, and gosh, maybe 3 of them replied. And that's kind of normal. You get a lot of doors closed, and you've got to just kind of keep going anyway. So that was how I started. And one person was willing to be my ambassador. So sometimes it's not about winning everybody. It's about winning one person who will introduce you to other people, because then you don't have to prove your credibility over and over and over again. But otherwise, it's just slowly. And sometimes people are going to tell you to go away. And I don't really argue with them. But I also don't really go away. I mean, I think I mentioned yesterday that woman, Lavon, who said, "You're going to make us out to look terrible," and wouldn't talk to me. Well, 3 days later, she talked to me. So I try not to get in people's faces if they don't want to talk to me, but I also just hang out.
So yesterday you discussed what inspired the idea for Nomad Land, but like, how did you begin going on the road, and what was it like to live out there?
Yeah, so in terms of actually getting out there, you know, I didn't really have a budget for it in the beginning, and I was writing about some stuff that I didn't find that interesting. But somebody had asked me to come moderate a panel at a conference in California, and anybody here been to California? Oh, a lot of California. Do we like California? No, oh, that was confusing. That was a real jumble. All right, well, I don't know how you feel about California, but I've got some friends there, and I'd like to see them. So I asked them to give me a stipend instead of putting me in a hotel, and I crashed with all my friends. And then I rented a car with the stipend, and I drove to Nevada And I met up with the people I'd emailed, and they introduced me to a bunch of other people. And then I went to Oklahoma, and then I did the same thing. And then when I got home, I had enough material that I could start building just almost like a short prototype to say, I'm meeting these people, I want to learn more. I wanted to show editors that I didn't just have an idea that might pan out, that I really was already jumping in and that I could do it, particularly because I'd never worked with them before and they don't really owe me anything. So I did that, and then Harper's, I was out there in a tent, and that was how I did it. But I didn't, I told you that story, how I didn't know who I was going to write about. So I put the tent next to people who were living in a school bus, because I was like, that looks friendly, I don't know. They got so sweet at some point that they would call me, they all called me Jessie, and they shared their coffee with me every morning. I'd hear, Jessie, coffee's on. And when I had never seen a kangaroo rat in the desert and I had to leave for a couple days, they told me they'd found one, their cat had killed it, and they were going to put it in my tent. So I made a lot of friends pretty quickly. Still haven't seen a kangaroo rat, though.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, do you still have contact with Linda May and others?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people pretty frequently. Swanky was just telling me she's really excited. She just bought a bigger RV and sold her van, and she was sitting in Arizona saying, this van was in a movie, somebody buy my van. And I think she was a little freaked out when at first nobody was actually buying the van. So heard that story from her lately. Stay in touch with Linda a lot. And then lots of the people I met just randomly pop up, because one of the reasons I'm on Facebook, it was one of the easiest ways to stay in touch with people. So I hear from people, some people I talk to regularly, and then just some people pop up, like the guy in the GMC motorhome who was at the sugar beet harvest, just popped up the other day to say hi. I haven't talked to him in 3 years. So, yeah, I really don't go away.
So, what would you say, were the most memorable or impactful moments from reporting and writing Nomadland?
I think one of the most impactful experiences for me was going from meeting a lot of individual people who'd kind of been thrown into different situations, whether it was staying at this RV park and working for Amazon, to going to this event called the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous, where people who lived on the road full-time had organized it themselves, had all these sessions teaching each other how to camp for free, how to do what they call stealth parking, which is basically how to sleep overnight in a city without getting caught by the cops. Because there are so many places where that's illegal. So they would talk about how you shouldn't get ready for bed where you sleep, how you could make your van look like a construction vehicle by putting a ladder on top to hide your solar panel, how you could leave a construction worker's vest on your seat, like all this urban camouflage stuff. So realizing that there really was this fully formed culture with this oral tradition and people sharing information, and that for me was incredible, and that just took it. I don't know if I would have done the book if that hadn't happened when I was out reporting, because just seeing that richness of community and sharing also made it so it wasn't really depressing all the time, right? For me, that was the exciting part of it. That was the upside.
They must teach you a lot on the skills, but what is the one most memorable thing that you learned from them?
Oh gosh, that's hard. I'm good at making things complicated. I could tell you the 10 most memorable things. Something that I learned, or something that I saw, or help me out.
Anything.
Well, oh goodness. I think just, all right, well, this is a little vague, but you said anything, so you asked for it. Just spending all that time with Linda, even though even some of my colleagues thought I was kind of nuts. I remember this woman, she's an amazing journalist. She writes for the New York Times Magazine. She's kind of like a mom figure to me. When you get older, you might have people where just because of age and experience gap, it's like they're half your friend and half your mom. I seem to end up in these situations, I don't know why. And she said, wow, Jess, you've been out there a long time. I said, yeah. You must really like Linda. I was like, I do. And just thinking, am I doing this wrong? Like, is this crazy? And just realizing that no, like I'm kind of forging my own path and how to report this, and it's working out. But, I look back on that now, and that feels like a huge thing. But at the time, again, it was scary. I have friends, there's a comedian named Maria Bamford. I don't know if anybody's into stand-up. She actually does a fair amount of stuff around mental health. And she likes to talk about when people ask her, are you done on a new project yet? Or like, what are you working on? Because when you're working on a book, it's 3 years. People keep asking you like you're not doing anything. They're like, are you still working on that book? And that really means like, I'll bet you're sitting around and watching reality TV. And you just kind of shrink inside. So Maria Bamford, when people say, are you working on a project? She says, oh, that project, I finished early. And now I'm floating in a boat of delicious gravy. So feel free to use that for any long-term project that's tweaking you out. Gravy boat.
So I guess this is a little off topic, but I'm very curious. So Nomadland is really about what we need to do to survive in America. What does Nomadland tell us about the economic system of the U.S. today?
Oh gosh.
Loaded question.
Whew. Dissertation. Yeah, I think there's, like anything, it's complicated, right? There's darkness and there's light, because the way the people I met cared for each other was really beautiful. But there's also this kind of myth of individualism in America. Has anybody ever heard of that pull yourself up by your bootstraps phrase? Do you know what that means? Can you tell us, Finn?
Like the whole concept of the American dream, that you need to work for yourself, and everything that you need to work for, or something like that.
Yeah, this attitude that everybody's perfectly self-contained and self-sufficient, as if we all built all the roads that we're driving on, which doesn't make any sense. The idea that you do it, no one's going to do it for you, and this kind of rugged cowboy thing, which really is a myth, right? In fact, the whole pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, which doesn't make any sense, and I don't think boots really have straps anymore, but when that phrase was coined in days of yore, it was meant to say something that's actually physically impossible to do. But now people use it as a you pulled yourself up. But the attitude is, there are so many things that we do better together. And for me, seeing these people on the road and seeing the mix of individualism, because they're doing something very different, and I think they thought of themselves as kind of rugged individualists, but seeing how much they still needed community and how much they thrived in community really spoke to me about where we are today, because I still think we do have this idea that we can all go it alone somehow, which doesn't make any sense, and I think plays out badly. I could say a lot of other stuff, but I'm going to cut myself off, okay?
And so you write about American subcultures, and so there are a lot of American subcultures in our country.
Maybe even in this room.
Yeah, exactly. What does that say about the country and the time that we're living in?
I think there have always been a lot of subcultures, and subculture is kind of a tricky thing, right? Because you define subculture in opposition to the mainstream. And what the mainstream is for you really depends on where you're sitting. Maybe the Finn mainstream is everybody with cool septum pierces, because that's the jam, right? So it's interesting, but for me, I love getting inside other worlds. And in some ways, the internet has, I think, accelerated the growth of subcultures finding each other, right? Because when I was growing up, maybe I could be the only weirdo in my town who listened to Ned's Atomic Dustbin. There were at least a few of us. They had a song called Kill Your Television. That should tell you everything you need to know. But now subcultures can find each other, and I think that's really uplifting and empowering. But in terms of all these subcultures of hate that we're seeing come into the mainstream more, it's really, really scary, because a lot of people who have a lot of pent-up rage can find other people to share that with, and I think even if there are not that many of them in numbers, they can kind of punch above their weight when they find each other. Does that make sense? I'm thinking of January 6th. So for me, what started out as this, there are so many worlds and I want to know about them all, it has really kind of got some different shadings now as I've gotten older, because I've always wanted to know about the secret world. Like, you tell me that there are people who go and explore like caves every weekend. I want to go and I want to know what they wear, what their lingo is, how they do it. Like, I just want to geek out on stuff with people who have arcane knowledge. But that's not all of it now. There's just so much identity and belonging. And I think there are lots of subcultures everywhere right now. So I don't know if it's even really a distinctly American thing, but I think it's something that, there's an idea that the internet might kill subculture, and I think the opposite has happened. So I remember thinking, I want to teach about subcultures and work with people. I have students in bed with subcultures sometimes when I teach at Columbia, and it's really fun and it's really hard, but everybody picks one. And I thought, this is this little arcane thing nobody's going to want to do. I'm never going to get to teach a class on this. And somehow it seems to be growing. So I was wrong, and I'm still learning.
So can you talk about your experience reporting on Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks? Like, how did you first become interested in that entire subject?
Sure. So forgive me. It was actually Snowden. I'm not trying to be like a gotcha. So Julian Assange did WikiLeaks. Ed Snowden was an NSA contractor who was working in Hawaii and who learned that our government was spying on us in ways they weren't supposed to, kind of in collusion with the cell phone companies and all sorts of stuff. And this stuff is supposed to be tightly regulated in terms of what kind of big brother-ish stuff is happening, but it wasn't. And he didn't think that his bosses would listen to him. Everybody knew this was going on. There's a legacy of government spying on Americans in this country. If anybody wants an interesting history project, look up COINTELPRO. I mean, our government spied on Martin Luther King. Like, our government, the FBI, did some really, really dodgy stuff trying to spy on activists, and sometimes planting people in activist groups to break them up. They call them snitch jackets. I mean, the whole thing is really fascinating. But anyhow, Snowden found this information and decided to leak it. And I don't cover national security typically, but my best friend Dale, who's also a journalist, who Nomadland is dedicated to, was actually dating a filmmaker, and I didn't even know about it. Her name is Laura Poitras. She won an Oscar for the film Citizen 4. She's the one who went to Hong Kong when Snowden had to flee the country. So when Snowden wanted to leak all these documents, he had approached Laura on the internet. And Laura did not know who this person was. And she'd been detained just about every time she came back into the US for many years because she was shooting with a camera documentaries in Iraq. And she was doing humanistic stuff, but the government decided that she must be bad and on their side. It was really crazy. So he knew that she'd dealt with privacy problems, contacted her, and had to send her, decided to send her, a bunch of stuff that he did steal from the NSA. So they needed to get it from Hawaii to New York. But the problem is, what if they're being spied on? This is all about spying, right? It'll make you paranoid. So he said, I need somebody you can trust absolutely who doesn't know you and won't ask any questions. And I was that sucker, because Dale said, would you receive a package for the cause of investigative journalism? He made me put my phone in the fridge. And I was like, what are we doing? Should we put our shoes in the broiler next? Like, but I learned a lot pretty quickly. So I didn't really get into any of it on purpose. But when it kind of came into my life and shook me up quite a bit, it was hard to not want to learn more. That was a longer answer than you wanted. Forgive me.
So how do you see the issue of government secrecy and transparency evolving now that we're in the digital age?
I think the government is not, well, one of the issues too, and it's almost a little mundane to talk about, is, and people don't always think about it, is corporate surveillance. The fact that, you know, does anybody's parents have like an Amazon Echo? Do you know what I mean? Alexa, who talks to Alexa? I'm sorry, I hate Alexa. We have a problem, me and Alexa. Amazon has filed patents about how they could use Alexa to detect your accent so they can tell where you live and who you are and if you come from overseas. They want to detect your mood. They want to hear if you've got travel plans. And it's really so they can market things to you and they can sell things to you. But these are things that they've filed with the federal. If anybody's actually nerdy enough that they want to see these patents, I'll send them to you. And looking at patents is kind of how you read the future, unless you like to speculate. So it's scary. I mean, there was a story where there was a young woman who was pregnant and didn't want her parents to know, and started getting mail for things related to pregnancy. And it was all because algorithms online had analyzed her consumer purchases that weren't even related to that. Maybe she bought a certain kind of moisturizer that somehow is correlated with, and basically her parents found out. And just all this stuff is really scary, and we're not good at reining it in. Europe is better at reining it in. Sometimes if you're online, you'll see like a European privacy notice pop up. So I'm worried about not just transparency and regulation in government in terms of them spying on us, because the corporations are the ones that have the big money right now. And I worry that when they build these tools to spy on us, even if it's just to sell us stuff, to say, oh, you've been ordering Peeps, I'm going to try to sell you a giant marshmallow. You know, even if it's kind of mundane, if the government has access to that, then it can be used for just about anything. So it's kind of boring, but I do think we need more regulatory action to rein in how these companies handle our data.
Yesterday, Elisha asked you a question about your editorial in The Atlantic about preparations for Roe versus Wade being overturned. Could you speak a little bit about that, and if anything has changed because Roe versus Wade has been overturned since then?
Oh my gosh, this is another dissertation, Finn.
Deep questions.
I know you do. Worst. Okay, yeah, a lot has changed. A lot has changed. I mean, one of the things I'm following, because it's hard to track it all, it's not usually my choice to write about things that are in the news so much because I get the journalistic equivalent of FOMO. Do we know what FOMO is? Oh, yes, we do. So it's really hard for me to think about all the things I could be covering, and I'm not. And the thing that I'm following most closely is these little grassroots efforts to help people out who are in states where they can't get the care that they're seeking, and how do they get access to that. But the problem was, and I think a lot of people in certain areas of the country might not realize this, is that access for so many people has been so compromised and so difficult for so long, just because it is so hard to access abortion in the US. It's not funded in many places the way other medical stuff could be. There was something that happened in 1972 called the Hyde Amendment. That means that federal Medicaid and Medicare can't pay for it, which, when you look at that, is really saying, if you're poor, we're going to make this very difficult for you. So things have changed since the overturning, but a lot of people, particularly in the reproductive justice movement, this is a term that was coined in the 90s during kind of a conclave of women of color saying, look, we want this to be about more than the right to have an abortion. We also want the right to parent in healthy and safe communities. It's just all about full bodily autonomy, and also about recognizing that in so many communities, people already don't have that. So the idea is the protections for abortion, for Roe, that's kind of the floor, and it's like the floor fell out. But so many people in this country, with the way we handle healthcare, we're in really bad situations that remain really bad. But otherwise, I mean, people are doing some kind of amazing teamwork to help each other out right now, but it's also just an incredible mess. I mean, I feel like every other day I read about somebody who had some kind of pregnancy trouble, and even when people want to have a kid, if the child or if you have a fetus that is not going to make it and not be born and not become a child, there are so many places where doctors are scared to help people, even if it could save the woman's life. Like, basically, if you're going to have a miscarriage or a stillbirth, they want the patient to be on the verge of death before helping them, because they're afraid of getting sued for performing an abortion. Does that make sense? So, short story long, it's a hot mess. We could talk about many threads of spaghetti in this mess, but those are a few that I think about a lot.
I guess on a different topic. Yesterday, we had a conversation about like how I want to be a writer. Do you have any like advice for any aspiring writers in the room?
Yeah, and it's always advice I should take too, probably, right? I mean, this is obvious, right? Writers write. I'm really good at not writing sometimes, so I need this advice also. But one of the things that some of the people I know who really get themselves writing the best are able to follow that phrase. Have you heard it? Dance like no one's watching? Is anybody in here capable of doing that? Because I'm not. I mean, you could do it. If so, do it right now, please. But, oh, right, I see some. Very nice. I see you. I'm not, but that's kind of the goal with writing, because a lot of writing is revision. So you've got to dance like no one's watching on the page and know that you can refine it later. And really no one is watching when you're writing, I hope. I mean, maybe the government, maybe Amazon, I don't know. But just really getting it down there and doing it, because the funny thing with writing and with journalism is you cannot make the perfect plan. We talked about this yesterday, right? You can make the best plan with the information you have, but you have to start paddling. And you've got to be out there in your boat. And the weather's going to change, and you're going to have to adapt to it. But if you stay on shore because you're telling yourself, oh, what will I do if the weather changes? What will I do if I find a shark? And you put so much stuff in your boat to protect against everything, either your boat's going to sink or you're just going to keep doing that forever. So it's really diving in and getting started and seeing what happens. Also, I find that when I have an idea, I'm excited to share. And I see this happen with people in fiction, nonfiction. It's so much easier to get other people excited on the quest, about the quest that you're on, when you're actually sharing the idea. So I have students who are like, I'm going to come to New York and I want to meet with 10 editors. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? I want to get to know them because I want to write stories for them. Okay, well, they're really busy, and do you have ideas for stories? No, but I will. No. Go in there so fired up about a story that you are practically exploding. You know what I mean? That's what they want to hear rather than I am here to be a journalist. They want to hear your passion, and they want to hear the actual story. Everybody likes hearing a story. So long-winded, digressive, yes? Go get them. Also read a lot.
Can you talk about your experience writing your book, Burning Man?
Sure.
And what inspired you to tell this story?
Yeah. So this is kind of a funny situation. I naively assumed that people knew what Burning Man was, and apparently now a lot of people have gone and looked it up, and everybody's parents are going to want my head on a pike. Sorry, guys. Joking. So Burning Man is this arts festival in the Nevada desert. It's a temporary city. And I'd been hearing about it for years. I saw pictures of people dressed up like pumpkins dancing on a trampoline. I saw pictures of a giant silver shark going through the desert at night. I said, what the heck is this? Is this something like from the 60s? Like, this is very strange and interesting. And maybe it'll turn out to be really dumb or I'm not going to be into it. But I have friends who go, and they convinced me to go. And I'm going to go once and see what it's all about. And when I went out there, it turned out there were a lot of really nerdy people building lots of huge art, being really, really goofy. I mean, we had porta potties, somebody had put a relaxation tape in the bathroom. So you'd walk in there and you would just hear, just relax. And I'd be like, ah! Like there was just so much humor and wit and weirdness going on. And I had a really good time. And I learned how to build things. So I kind of kept going back. But I also was working at a newspaper in New York called The Observer, and everybody there thought they were like really sophisticated at the time. And it was very embarrassing to tell them that I was going to Burning Man because they thought that was very not cool. But then it looked like the paper was going to die, and I wanted to go somewhere else. And this is just a weird story, forgive me. I had the friend who took me to Burning Man heard about a publisher that was looking for a book on Burning Man. So I was just trying to be, pretend I didn't go to Burning Man and hide it in my life and be like, okay, whatever. And then suddenly it was like, well, do you want to write a book on it? And then, are you kidding? So instead of kind of just having it be this other part of my life, I kind of ended up embracing it, writing a proposal and just bringing in a bunch of photos to share with this editor who loved it. But for me, one of the most exciting things with that project was wanting it to be really visual, because there are so many little artifacts that people come home with. So when I interviewed people, I would bring a scanner, and I'd have everybody just bring out their box and scan all the objects, and I got to work with a designer who helped me kind of lay them out on the page. So it was a really interesting experience, but I was also kind of freaked out because I had quit my day job to get it done. And I'm proud of it. It's not, people kind of like, oh, that's the thing you wrote in your 20s, and it is, and it's part of my past and who I am now.
So how do you see the evolution of Burning Man and its impact on wider culture? Like, can you discuss your thoughts on the commercialization of the event and how it affects the culture and community of Burning Man?
Yeah, so I think Burning Man actually gets a bit of a short stick when it comes to its influence on the wider world. I mean, when I started out, just out of college in New York in 2000, there weren't things called maker spaces and that whole maker culture that I really think has enriched the world. And that all was part of Burning Man. I mean, if you look at the people who are running like Maker Magazine and Maker Faire and just really getting that out into the world, it's kind of part of the same cultural movement. The idea that you don't need to be a capital A artist to do something. When I went out to Burning Man, when I was finishing the book, I helped put together a giant stainless steel serpent with 42 interactive flamethrowers and an articulated steel head that moved around, and you could activate the flamethrowers by pushing buttons, or you could come up with a Wii controller, and they'd all go tack, 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 tack along the spine. It's called the Serpent Mother. If you look it up, it's still on the internet. But the people who built that weren't capital A artists. There were molecular biologists who learned how to deal with propane for all the plumbing so we could set things on fire. There was a waitress. There was a high school student. There were people just from all sorts of situations who said, wait, just like Linda May in her 60s, like, why can't she act? They said, well, why can't we build big art together? And they did it. And I think that attitude has gone out into the broader culture. I think a lot of what has happened with Burning Man too is there are always issues of scale, right? This would be a very different event if we were in a giant stadium, right? Would you be a little more nervous? I mean, maybe. You might have to sing for the opening act. I don't know. But things change when they get bigger. It's really cool that you all get to go to a small school where you all know each other. It's a different environment. It's intimate. And I think things have changed at Burning Man. It's gotten a lot bigger. But that's just kind of the way things go. So, you go there now, and okay, it could be Katy Perry's over there on a Segway, and people are trying to build a fancy hotel in the desert, or it's just the same people I knew in 2000 in tents over in the corner. So, I don't know, I think things grow. I think that's just kind of part of the evolution of subcultures. Do things kind of sell out? Yeah, I mean, everything impacts the cultural mainstream and corporations and something at some point. I think it's really interesting to see where the new things are growing. And that's something that you all are you're better positioned to do than I am, because it's people who are just a little bit older than you who are doing those things. My friends are just talking about the old days.
What's your opinion on how the subculture evolved into probably the mainstream in years? Do you just watch it grow, or do you want to make something out of it or change?
It's funny, I think the older I get, the more I kind of watch things grow as a cycle. But when I first started going in 2002, I just remember feeling like no matter when you started going, it was always better the year before. People started making stickers saying you missed it, it was better last year. And I think you see that in a lot of subcultures too. I'm like, why was everything better right before I got there? I must be the wrecker of subcultures, right? I show up and it's gone. I'm like, you know, Typhoid Mary or something. But really everybody is, because whenever you show up in some of these groups, it's like the best day was yesterday. And I think that's kind of silly. It's interesting to see what people are creating based on what they learned from that. So for me, Burning Man stopped being interesting if it became, you know, for some people it kind of became a way of life. I'm like, this is interesting as a pattern breaker. You know, if it's something that's gonna shake me out of my daily, but if it becomes my daily, that's just another grind. Does that make sense? So, help me answer that a little better. How can I? Everybody's panicking. All right, that's it. What next?
We have one more question for you. Can you talk about any of your upcoming projects or books that you're working on?
A little bit. So I am really knee-deep in the reporting on the abortion stuff right now. And I was all over the place during the summer. I was in Tennessee with people who were protesting, people on the religious right who were like blocking a clinic. I was out with the guy in the airplane. I've been out with people who are making bulletproof vans to serve as mobile clinics. So right now, I am just trying to slow my roll and write. So that's kind of my big project right now. I'm judging a book contest too. They gave me 40 books to read. So that's kind of eating all my time. What I'm really excited about is to get to the phase in the structure and writing where maybe I can have a couple side projects. I have a couple things I'm thinking about for the future, but I can't share them right now, except maybe, I know, in small groups, just because everything I do is, this is gonna sound silly, everything I do is really easy to do. I don't mean it's easy to access, but I mean, it's all hiding in plain sight. You know, I read things and I think about things, and some people write about famous people where you can't really get to them, and some people write about countries where you'd need $1 billion to fly there and work there. I write about stuff that's really not very far away. So it's kind of this anybody can do it stuff. So I try not to talk about it too much while I'm doing it, because I don't want company, because it makes it harder. And I know none of you are gonna like show up and stalk me, but it's just kind of become this like habit of mine where I wait. But we can stay in touch if you want, and I'll tell you more when it's, you know.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience as a whole. So if anyone has any more questions, I will run very athletically to you with the microphone.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk with us a bit about the process of what it was like to watch your book get adapted into this film. And so right now I'm teaching a senior elective on adaptation. And so I'm just kind of curious about, you know, this is a film that has kind of made your book incredibly famous, but then you kind of don't get to share all the fame because the fame is another thing. The fame belongs to the film and belongs to the actors and the, you know, the director. And so I'm just curious I'm wondering if it's bittersweet, you know, is there a little bit of FOMO? Is this your crowning achievement? And so I'm just wondering what that must feel like for you. And also how the film is both your book, but then it's also not your book.
Yeah. What would you do if I rolled on the floor and started crying? Like a baby. Okay. See, I can't act. That's why I don't get that kind of glory. I can joke about it. Yeah, so coming into this, I mean, everything that happened with the film is crazy. This sort of stuff doesn't happen in real life. I don't know what reality I'm in right now, but it doesn't. I have a lot of friends who do nonfiction. They've had projects adapted or projects optioned. So somebody said, I want to adapt this. You know, like Johnny Depp wanted to adapt somebody's. He's problematic now, but he was problematic to my friend way back then too, because he just optioned his project and then sat on it for years. That's what happens. Like, people say they're interested. My best friend likes to say the Hollywood ship threatens to dock and then kind of steams past. That's what happens 99% of the time. So I think I was kind of blessed with not taking it entirely seriously when there was interest initially. I also have a lot of skeptical friends, and they said, look, once you do this, there are going to be things that are out of your control. And if you do this and you want to do this, you know, it's good to accept that. So part of me was thinking, you know, they're going to do something, and my book is always going to be my book. Nobody can really change that at this point. And I'm proud of it, and I worked harder on it than anything in my life. Is it my crowning achievement? Well, I hope not. I'm not dead. I'm going to keep doing stuff. But when I was doing the book, it wasn't like I was trying to create a crowning achievement. I was just trying to find somewhere to park the van. So I think honestly, part of the glory is in the doing of it, not like waiting around for people to pat you on the back. And I think for me, feels like a really healthy attitude with the work. Like, the reward of this kind of work is getting to do more of it, not having people going, hey, you did a thing. There's a joke that it's like, everybody likes having written. But if you can get into actually enjoying the work, like, that's kind of the point. So for me, the most exciting things about the movie were watching people I'd spent all this time coming to care about, Linda May and Swanky, who had been written off by so many segments of society, getting a chance to do this amazing thing and act with, like, you know, who gets to do that? And just rooting for them and knowing they're going to go into this world and thinking, like, wow, I hope that at some point in my life, if everybody's written me off, I get to do something like that. That's really cool. So for me, seeing them do that was one of the most exciting things. And in terms of, in the beginning, I just tried to stay healthy about it, which I met up with the director, and I said, look, here's how I'm looking about this. I've seen your past work, and I think it's amazing. She'd done a film called The Rider that I thought was brilliant. And I said, I'm looking at this like you're a chef. You're this brilliant chef. And I have been hoarding ingredients in my pantry for about 10 years. Some of them might be moldy. Many of them might be vintage. But I'm going to put them all out on the table. And you're going to cook a meal. I don't know what you're going to cook. I don't know how you're going to cook it. Hopefully no allergens. But I think it's going to be delicious based on what you've done in the past. So that was my attitude, was I'm going to share a lot of my research, my B-roll. I'm going to introduce you to people. And then you're going to go do your thing. And it's going to be different from my thing. And I think I knew that enough from watching adaptations. I was like, you can't follow a book like a script. It's not a documentary. I hope it catches some emotional truth. And I think it did. But also, I know we're a movie culture. I know we're not a book culture. I wish we were a book culture. I'm a book person. But fame is also not what I'm going for. I've now seen people live in that bubble, and it's really weird. I think it kind of warps their brains sometimes. I mean, everybody I met was lovely, and I'm not saying their brains in particular were warped, but just the idea that there's actually some freedom you don't get once people recognize you. It seems awful, to be honest. Like, I don't want to be famous. Is that okay? All right, cool.
I'm going to pick up on something you said, because I was so happy after reading the book and knowing kind of when your reporting ends, and the movie, of course, comes out after the book, and I was so happy to know that Swanky's still alive and didn't die of cancer, as portrayed in the movie. I'm wondering, with Linda May and with Swanky in particular, if they had any reservations about being part of the film, knowing that a portion of their story was being captured, and then they were being forced to play a character too, where there were elements of their experience that are fictionalized.
Yeah, and I wasn't laughing at you just now. I was laughing because the whole Swanky situation, there was actually an alternative weekly publication that ran with that, said that Swanky was actually dead, and that the whole film had been made in Swanky's memory. Swanky's family was horrified. Swanky herself thought that was the funniest thing she had ever heard. She has printed out shirts called Swanky Lives that say Swanky Lives. I think you can probably buy them on the internet. Swanky just ate all of this up. So in terms of the roles, I think they were, it's funny, I mean, these are people who've had such fully formed lives that I heard instances of them telling people no. Like Linda said, I can't cry right now. And that had to be okay. It's not like they were complete pawns of the directors, which is kind of cool because they were invited to bring themselves to this, but also they're not actors. So I think, you know, I would hear about them pushing back. Swanky was really, really mad when they wanted to like repaint or something part of her van, and she was like, you can't do that, this is my van. So people, not mad, but just basically holding the line. So they were okay with it, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, it was very intense on set. I think that's normal. But they seemed to kind of approach it from a spirit of play. And they were thrilled that people seemed to really appreciate what they did and the work that they'd put into it. But they weren't, I didn't hear a lot of, oh, this isn't me, how very dare you. Like they knew that it was fiction, and they had the choice, actually, I thought this was interesting, of keeping their names or not, acknowledging that it's fiction. And they decided to keep their names knowing that it was. And that kind of told me something about how they were approaching it. Does that make sense? They could have said, all right, well, if you want to make me do this, I'm going to call myself Mary Lou. But nobody wanted to be Mary Lou.
So you said that you kind of explored and felt out a bunch of different subcultures. I was wondering which subcultures you kind of explored and what you found most interesting about a few of them.
Oh my God, so many. I mean, everything from people who nerd out on, did a New York Times style section cover many years ago on very young people who are obsessed with typewriters. Is that still a thing? Does anybody in here have a typewriter? Hey! Does anybody in here who's a high school student have a typewriter? Sorry, your daughter. Does she? They're kind of amazing, right? And they only do one thing, which is fascinating these days. But, you know, I've written about squatters. I've written about Hell's Angels, the motorcycle gang. I've written just a lot of different people doing a lot of different things together. And again, this is going to sound boring, but I think stuff with the van dwellers, for me, just because I got to do it for so long, I have never spent that much time with one subculture that I wasn't personally a part of myself. So for me, I think that was the best one.
I want to ask some questions about your writing process. Like, how do you get over writer's block? 'Cause it's something I struggle with a lot.
Oh, God. That's a very presumptuous question. Well, there's productive procrastination. There's doing things that aren't writing. Here I am. You're making me blush almost right now. So when it comes to writer's block, I think when we say writer's block, what do we mean? So I think there's some idea in some spaces that like inspiration has to come hit you like a lightning bolt, or the muse must appear to you in a dream, and that's all not true. You just have to write, and you have to let the writing be bad sometimes. And again, I am not good at the dance like no one's watching thing, but you know, sometimes just sitting down and making yourself do it, even if you think it's awful. Nowadays, we have dictation software. So one of the ways I'm trying to trick myself out of stuck brain is by talking at my computer. And sometimes that's actually really, really helpful. Or just writing through something really quickly and giving myself a time limit. Sometimes 20 minutes for me seems to be like this magic amount of time. Does anybody set timers to get stuff done, or am I the only crazy? Yeah, it works. Why does it work? Does anybody know why it works? Because it's just one thing. And you know you can do other things later, and when time is before you, like this endless highway, it's so easy to get distracted, right? I remember Linda saying when she worked at Amazon, I can do anything for 5 more minutes. So I kind of took that attitude, and I was like, I could be working in the Amazon warehouse right now, and I'm not. I'm sitting at this computer. What is my problem? I think I beat myself up, which is probably not healthy. But again, breaking it into chunks, anything you can do to make it feel less like a wall of ice. You could look up and see the whole ice wall, or you could see just maybe the 5-foot climb that's right ahead of you and how you're going to handle that initial problem. And then if that doesn't work, 3 foot. So make it smaller and smaller.
I have one question before we dismiss. What is your favorite book to film adaptation?
Now is where I have to admit that I am incredibly movie stupid. No, I'm serious. It's really embarrassing. Everybody makes fun of me because I'm not that well versed in film at all. So I actually need to think on that a bit. I grew up in a household with a lot of books. We did not see a lot of movies. I think my first movie was Labyrinth with David Bowie in movie theaters. That was fantastic. But I haven't really studied much as a book to film adaptation. So the real answer is I'm going to float in my gravy bucket and think on that. Is that okay? All right. Happy gravy buckets to all of you.
If you come up with an answer, I'll report back out to the rest of you. I'm going to get out from behind this bush. And I really, really want to say thank you, Ms. Bruder, for being here, for being with us. Thank you for being an incredible audience.
Thanks for the great questions, seriously.